Hi, Matt. Thanks again for inviting me over to your shop. And first, what's the name of your channel again? Just to kind of make sure that everybody.
It's under my name, Matt Grillo. I didn't know you could put it under a business name, but almost all the videos, if you look something up, Lizzard Racing.
And where did the name Lizzard Racing come from?
Just a nickname back way back in the day. I originally had plates for my first Corvette that had that on it, and it just kind of stuck. And to be honest with you, I grew up with all the mongooses and snakes and jungle gyms, and everybody had nicknames. So when I went into business, I never wanted to put it in my name for lots of different reasons. The backdoor reason was in case I ever sold my business, I would be able to sell my business without my name attached to it.
Got it.
How do you sell a business that's Matt Grillo Race Engines and the guy that bought it for him is not Matt Grillo? It becomes more difficult. Whereas Lizzard Racing, and it also gives you a little bit of anonymity, okay? Because people don't know. A lot of people only know me as Lizzard. They don't even know my name. I could go somewhere, and if they were looking for me, unless they saw me and they looked just for names, they wouldn't know. You wouldn't know.
Makes sense.
That was the side part of it. So it was more nickname. It was unique, and like I said, being a kid of the '60s, it made it very, very nice because I remember when they used to do LeMatch races like in the early '60s. I was 60, let's say 64, 65, up to 67, 68. I remember all the match races, and they'd come to town, and they all carry on about jungle gym this and mongoose that. It was back in the day. They used to call it banging the drum. That's how they got people to the track. So
nice. Yeah, it's kind of funny that you brought up having your name separate from the business, because I'm thinking as you're saying this, McAfee Antivirus, John McAfee, he sold the business and an IT company, and then all of a sudden McAfee comes out with all of his videos, and the company that owned it got a little bit upset because it makes a lot of sense to kind of separate yourself from it. It makes it more sellable.
It does, but more than anything, it just makes sense for the main reason. The other reason is it gives you anonymity, not the main reason. And if you sell it, you're done with it, you could walk away from it, be finished with it. The downside to that is I'm Lizzard. I've always been. I'll be 100 years old, and everybody remember me as that because I never sold a business. I never wanted to sell a business. When I left New York, I basically dropped everything. I didn't want to sell it. I didn't want anybody else to have it. I just left. Since people have stolen my name, and there are Lizzard here, Lizzard there, Lizzard everywhere, but you know what? That's fine. It don't matter to me. It was so difficult to get to the point I was. If anybody could take my name and make something out of it, good luck to you. Good luck to you.
Makes sense. Now, you've had some pretty amazing cars over the years. Race cars that you've built, that you've driven.
Oh, gosh.
Tell me about some of. I mean, what was your first car that you took on the track? And maybe another day, you can give maybe some tips on what to do, what not to do at the drag strip.
Oh, gosh.
Or we could also talk about maybe your first time at the drag strip. That would be another another fun one.
How about this? The first time I went to the drag strip, I must have been 5 or 6 years old. My father took us. It was National Speedway. Everybody was there. All the stars were there. Stars via.
Right.
And they were an AHRA track. Terrific facility. The guy knew how to run a program. I remember being 5 or 6 years old, hanging out at the goodie booth, and I wanted a T-shirt. Well, less T-shirts, but I wanted all the stuff that was available. They had calendars and car pictures and all sorts of stuff that they sold there for the guys that had the cars. We couldn't afford any of that stuff. My father had all he could do to pay to get us into the track and spend the afternoon maybe drinking a couple of beers, watching from the stands. That was the first time I went. But that's also the way you get hooked. You see these guys racing. As a kid of the '60s, at that point where it's a little more formidable for me. Man, if you were in the 50s, if you grew up in the 50s or the 60s, you had to go race. You had to have a fast car. That was the culture. That didn't change until I actually got a car, and then by 76, 77, it was over. If you were, especially with the gas crisis, if you were racing a car back then, you were a pariah. That didn't come back until my generation of guys started making it happen in particular, late 70s, early 80s, okay? And I didn't make it happen. They did. It just became very big, okay? And it was only because it was destined to come back. The heyday in most of the racing was either in the 60s, for me personally, 80s.
Nice, nice. And your first time at the drag strip was with your dad. He brought you when you were pretty young. Your first experience driving on the racetrack.
Oh my gosh!
And then we'll get into the cars. But I have a feeling this is going to be.
I remember the first car I got, the '68 Camaro. It was a 6-cylinder with a 3-speed, and I had a 6-cylinder. I thought that was the fastest thing on the road until I got my first V8, and I put a V8 with a 4-speed, and it was a 350. And I remember this. I remember it like it was yesterday. I changed to 350, and I did, let's say, a terrible job building the first engine. I didn't understand what I was doing. I kind of knew where the parts went, but I didn't understand the clearances. There was so much I did not understand, and it went together, and it ran, and I ran. I had run a ridge reamer through it. Okay. You know, the stones, okay, to take out the ridge.
Yep.
Only problem is I forgot to stop. It was I didn't know any better. It must have been, and I'm guessing because you're talking about when I was 16. You're talking about 50 years ago. It probably started out as a standard bore block. Probably by the time I was done, the thing had to be 25 over. If it wasn't 25, it was 20. You would start that engine with a forged piston, and it would knock and growl and bang so bad on startup, and it would kind of clear up. I beat the daylights out of that thing like a redheaded stepchild. I can't even tell you how many. I remember going to the last time before that engine blew up. It was knocking so bad, and everybody's telling me, stop. It's the water pump knocking. It's the water pump. Till I got to the end of the track, and it had kaboomed itself. And it's like, all right. And then we start with the better stuff, okay? Now I got a job. Now I got a couple bucks. Now I'm more interested in going faster. Now this is in '78. Real super guy helped me. He was one of the owners in a speed shop, machine shop. His name was Bill. Well, actually, it was between Bill and Brian, but more Bill. Bill took a liking to me. That thing, he talked me into building an offset ground small block, and they didn't really have strokers back then. I built a 364. We bought the best heads at the time, which was that 492 turbo casting. It ran like crazy. It had a 4-speed, and Brian was the real sharp guy on transmissions. He knew 4 speeds like, you know, how to wake up in the morning. He was just that brilliant with that stuff. I remember going to the track, and I had to have a cleaning lady clutch. Was effectively, it was a 6-paddle clutch with brass, so it was basically either on or off. There was no middle to it. Now, during that time, clutches were consumable. You didn't expect the clutch to last 2 or 3 times out to the track, and that was it. Anyway, I'm driving the car. I was worse than terrible. Every time I would go to shift, it would go right, then it would go left. If I tell you I drove it from the grass to the center line every run. And when I say the grass, I don't mean like I got near the grass. I mean in the grass, and I'm shifting it because I'm dumb as a rock. I don't know any better. And you're going just fast enough to be dangerous and just fast enough to hurt yourself, but I was just stupid enough not to know better, okay? And that car I wound up keeping. Somewhere along the line, there was a 66, a 67 big block Chevelle I stumbled in. That car was faster. That was an 11-second car, okay? So I shelved the Camaro because I needed to spend more money on it. I wound I wound up having to do other things. I wound up having to do a Dana and a few other things. The Chevelle took me into the mid-11s, and that was really just a street car. And then the Camaro, once I was done with it, we put the Dana, we put the right gear in it. I learned to drive a little better. That car wound up going 1040. That was pretty fast back in the day for a small block, and it was a bone stock 68 Camaro with steel fenders, steel everything, steel hood with a big plastic scoop on it, because I had to have the big plastic scoop, and inner fender wells, and I didn't understand anything about making them lighter. I just wanted them to look pretty, and that's what I thought it should be, which was one of the lessons I carried forward in life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it started. Then after that, it was just car after car. And again, you start climbing the ladder with cars. I started with the Camaro, which was nothing, which I limped into the Chevelle, and it was a big block, and I learned a little more. Then I straightened out my Camaro, and my Camaro turned into a Chevelle. The Chevelle turned into a Nova, and every car got a little bit better as we went along. And the only reason I could do that is back in the day, somebody else would buy that equipment from you, and then you were able to spend that money and step into the next equipment. You never got your money back,
Right.
but at least you had something you could sell. It didn't completely devalue, and you could step up to the point I finally got first a Firebird, which was built by a couple of friends of mine, and then I stepped into some of the Pro Mod stuff later on that I was lucky enough to drive. In hindsight, the best car I ever had was a 66, we called it a 67 Chevelle. The car was fun. It was easy to work on. It was easy to drive. I should have kept that car and not outsmarted myself. And you start stepping up, because like everybody else, you want to go a little faster, Hell, how many guys, they want to go a little faster, and when they go a little faster, they want to go a little faster again, and before you know it, you got giant engines and big gears, and it just doesn't end. So a lot of these lessons I take forward in life when I see people doing this stuff, and a lot of times I tell them either to jump to the end and spend for the good stuff, or just enjoy what you got, because that's what you can afford. And I've seen more guys 50-50. Some guys do that, and they enjoyed it, and they still probably have their cars today. And other guys that wanted to step up, that went through all their money, and now they're broke, and through all their cars.
Yep.
So, but that's just, it's the nature of the beast. You know, everybody also wants what they don't got. For me, that Chevelle was probably the best car I ever had. I learned so much on that Chevelle. I was a 4-speed guy. That's what you grew up with back in the 60s and early 70s, and that's what I wanted, and that's what I had, okay? I had 2 4-speed cars, mainly because I couldn't afford the 5-speed. But I had 4-speed cars. That's what you ran, straight gear cars, manual shift cars.
Yep.
I started with a Chevelle, and I didn't know my ass from my elbow with automatic transmissions. And I bought an automatic transmission for it. And that one failed. Not that it failed. I got it started, wouldn't go into gear. All the shifter linkage was doing wrong inside. The guy that did the trans for me, it was a big company. They couldn't have been any nicer. They helped me out very much, gave me another unit. That unit lasted till a parking lot. I called him, I said, really? So he said, look, I'm going to go over the unit with my super nice guy. Okay? Redid the unit. That lasted 5 runs. Okay? The problem with 5 runs is I was in Maple Grove testing, and I thought I was going to spend all weekend testing. I had allotted myself Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, okay, in particular Saturday, which is a good day to test, and 5 runs, and I was done. It's like, and back in the day, I couldn't afford a spare transmission. I couldn't afford a spare converter. I couldn't afford spare stuff, okay? That turned into, so I got a very good lesson on automatic transmissions and people and who to deal with and where people were and what companies were good and what companies were less than perfect, let's say.
Right.
I finally got hooked up with, in particular, I got hooked up with ATI. And then I had units that didn't fail, and they stayed together, and they were good. And I brought them, and I left New York, and I'd take a bunch of them, and I'd have them done, and I'd go to I'd even sell some of them. That's because I tied it into the business. I would go down there with 3 or 4 or 5 units, and either I'd trade them in, or they'd build them for me on the spot. And those people couldn't have been any nicer.
Right.
And and I got the tour, and I'm buying units, and they showed me the balancer operation. They showed me everything. ATI was really terrific to me back in the day. The only problem was making the trip. Because it was no matter what you did, it was about 5 hours from where I was. Okay, if you got in traffic, it was worse. But then after that, all the other cars, I loved all my cars. Please don't misunderstand. I loved them all. I loved the Firebird. That was a terrific car. I loved that 53 Corvette I had. Okay, loved that car. It was comfortable. It was easy to drive. And in particular with the Corvette, I could get the Corvette from A to B as good as anybody, except for the fact I'd shift first early. Every time. If you drive by the seat of your pants like I did, you're always early. Because you feel it. You get a tremendous amount of G-force on you, and the G-force starts to leave, and you think, all right, it's time to shift. We got to go. And you make that shift. I'd shifted at 6,900 every time, maybe 7,000. Now, this also goes back to I only ran a shift light. A tachometer in a race car nowadays is useless. Back in the 70s, in the 60s, all right, fine, you had the tach drive tach, and that was important. You had to know where to shift it. Once the electronic stuff came out, it was basically wait for a shift light, come on, shift it.
Right.
I probably out of, let's say I made 100 runs or 120 runs in that car. Out of 120 runs in that car, if I shifted it on time 5 times, that would be a lot. Now, how do I know that? Because those are 5 of my best runs. You wait for the shift, and off you go, and then you don't lose the 1-2 shift, and everything falls in place after that. You get with it. But I was just terrible with that. Terrible. And that car could have been a little faster. The fastest I ever went with that car was like a 640. I think it was 649 at 219, almost 220 miles an hour. And I was learning. I was way behind those other guys. I'm coming in with his guys out there that have went through probably 4,000 or 5,000 pistons and 4,000 or 5,000 runs, and they were so far ahead and so much more talented because they did R&D work the old-fashioned way, trial and error.
Yep.
And they knew what to do. They knew not what to do because they made all those mistakes back in the mid to late 80s, where there wasn't even top sportsman yet. It was all quick 8 stuff. Okay. And perfect example. I was at Bristol when Gordy went a 6. I'm sorry. He went a 599 or a 598 or a 5. I don't remember.
When he broke the 6s.
He broke the 6s. First in the 6s. Tommy Howes was actually the first, but I liked Gordy a lot. Gordy was a terrific guy. And the man that owned his car, he was a little bit vain. He never wore his glasses all the time. And they were on the starting line. Everybody's jumping up and down. They're so happy for him and Gordy, okay, to be the first. Because you got to understand, now this is Bristol. I think it was 86 or 87. Every car to the starting line could have been the first to the 5s. And when I say first to the 5s, there was so many 6.0s and 6.001 runs that it's like it just happened to be Gordy. And he was such a terrific guy. And it's like he didn't bother wearing his glasses. Everybody's jumping up and down. He don't know what's going on until somebody walks over and tells him, and he realizes he's the first in the 5s. Okay? Terrific run. Part of history that'll never change. And those guys were so far ahead because they had trial and error. Not even R&D. Trial and error. We did this. It caused that. We do this. And they were all bright guys. And they just knew. They knew when they were going to burn up the engine. They knew how fast it would go. They knew what they could get away from. And the only thing that made them faster and faster is technology finally caught up with some of these guys. And as the technology caught up, and the better pistons started showing up, the better clutches started showing up, the better data logging system started showing up, they had more information, it became a little easier, and that made it easier for a lot of other people too. Okay, made a lot of other people. So, but I miss my Pro Mod car. I made the mistake that I wanted to race Pro Mod. It's a professional category. Who doesn't want to run professional? But the problem is I did not realize on a small side, and this is going to sound ridiculous to most people, on the small side, how much it costs. On the big side, how much time it costs. Okay? You can't be a little bit pregnant when it comes to racing. Either you're in or you're out. You spend all the money you got, and you spend, in particular, all the time you got, and you work on your car constantly. You're trying to look for stuff, I never stood a chance time-wise. I'm trying to develop a business and make things happen that just, my own short-sightedness, it couldn't have happened because I couldn't give it enough time.
You had a family as well. That takes time.
I have a terrific wife. She took care of a lot of that because she knew part of the racing was part of the business, so she put up with a lot of baloney from me, okay, as far as racing, okay? But she knew it was important to grow the business, and it's what I wanted, okay? I wasn't a gambler. I didn't have any girlfriends. I went to work, and then I went to race. And for me, I was lucky, and she understood this. Racing was part of that business.
Right.
You know, it was hard to separate the two. Like I said, the only mistake I made, the time. I'm trying to develop a business and make it grow, you know, and I couldn't make the time to go race. I just couldn't make enough time. Guys would hop in the truck and they'd disappear for, a month. They'd be traveling either all the way down south or from Texas. Most everything for me was east of the Mississippi. It wasn't California. It wasn't, any West Coast stuff. It was all east of the Mississippi, maybe with the exception of the Texas races. And if you wanted to race Pro Mod back in that time, you were racing Alabama, you were racing Georgia, you were racing North Carolina, you were racing South Carolina, you were racing in Florida. You were not going to New York. You were not going to New Jersey. There was no national events for that stuff back in the day. These guys were racing at these tiny little 8-mile tracks. They were racing at, I've never been near Shuffletown. They were racing at Orangeburg, which I think now RJS owns, and I think they've changed it to Orangeburg Raceway Park. Rockingham, Piedmont, Farmington, plus there was 1,000 other little tracks that they were racing. And those guys were badass. I mean, just terrific races. And it just, I couldn't do both. I couldn't make the time to do both, okay?
I saw in your older videos your wife was in Selma. Did she work at the shop with you, or?
Very rarely,
Okay.
Starting in, my first son was born in 88. So from 88, actually, he was born the beginning of 88. So way back in 87, okay, was the last time she worked at the shop. She'd always come by, always say hello. But I mean, the last time she worked of any time in the shop was 85 or 86.
That's kind of neat. You guys built it together.
It was a combination of reasons. She didn't like the racing. She let me race even though she didn't like it. And we were growing a family. Okay?
Yep.
She enjoyed the children far more than anything else. I made sure that they had what they needed as far as clothes and food and a house, and it just was one of those things that worked for us. It worked.
Nice.
So
it sounds like one hell of a career with racing. And you raced for how many? When did you stop racing competitively?
2004.
2004.
I mean, I went to other races, tested some stuff, but
Right.
not competitive. 2004 was the last race I went to. I went to Rockingham, and that was the last race I was at Rockingham in 2004. I was a nobody, and I finished my career as nobody. Okay? There's probably, if there's not one, there's probably 1,000 guys out there that were like me, that wanted to go race, that whether they had money, I don't know, but didn't realize the commitment you got to make.
Yeah.
You know, perfect example. You leave New York, and you got all that money in tolls. You got to get over bridges. And when I went to Rockingham, that's about a 11, 12-hour ride.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would wind up leaving, if I was lucky, at like 8 o'clock on Wednesday to be there for Thursday morning, okay, so I could set up and go race. The problem is, those guys are already there. Most of those guys had the better spots. Those guys live down here.
Right.
They didn't have to travel 12 hours, okay? And I'm not going to say it gave them an advantage other than the fact that they didn't have to deal with some of the expenses going over bridges and tunnels and tolls and traffic. They didn't have to deal with that stuff.
But they had advantages. I mean, if it's in your home area, you need to get parts, you need to get this, you need a hand with something. If it's fairly, I mean, it's that home court advantage.
You know, it's less that. These are some bright guys. They may not have been engineers, but they were some of the best trial and error guys I've ever seen. You know, I watch what they did, and you figure out what they're doing based on what they're doing. I mean, you don't know everything,
Right.
but you know a lot of it. And the big thing they had going for them, okay, they'd race somewhere on Tuesday. They'd
Mhm.
race somewhere on Wednesday, Thursday. Maybe they take Friday off. Saturday. Probably not Sunday. So they're racing 4 or 5 days a week. Hell,
Wow.
one of the things that I really like down here is I would go to Piedmont on a Thursday. We could race to 10, 11 o'clock at night on a Thursday, wrap it all up, come back to the house here, fix some stuff up, spend all day Friday straightening out a car, and then load it up and head down to Fayetteville. Fayetteville had Freaky Friday. Freaky Friday, the gates open at 5, and they race till the next morning.
So you used to come down to North Carolina quite a bit. For
No,
the
that's when I
tracks.
moved here. That's when I moved
Oh,
here.
that's when you moved here.
Right.
Got
I
it.
used to come to Carolina to race. I raced with my car. I raced with a bunch of other guys, and I raced in particular another guy. We had a he had a twin turbo car that I worked on. That was Mike. I mean, terrific guy. And we came down here to race, and it's just tough because he had the same problem I did. You know, you can't run your business. You can't run your business remotely very effectively. Sometimes you just got to be there.
Right.
Okay, because you can solve problems in 2 minutes if you're standing there looking at it. You know everything. You know, you pull up to an intersection, you just know right away when you're supposed to go. You don't have to think about it. If you're trying to do it from a mile away, you can't do it because you don't have all the information.
Right.
You know, so maybe that's the best way I could word it, but running a business remotely is very difficult.
Yeah.
Okay, and my short-sightedness was, along with that racing. Perfect example, Englishtown. We go to an Englishtown Night of Thrills, okay? It was the driver, which was Mike Ashley, my guy Dave,
Mm-hmm.
and me. We drove the truck and trailer there. He came in and spent time with us, but he was the driver. He was a bright guy, very good driver, very personable, but it was up to me and Dave. We burned up on the first run, we burned 2 pistons. Actually, it's one on each side. It took us about 42 minutes. Pan off, heads off, pistons out, pistons changed, clutch out, clutch was cooling, I'm back under, and it was like I wasn't bright enough to realize I needed more guys. I also at that point couldn't afford more guys, okay? Because back in the 80s, back in the 70s, guys would work for a free T-shirt. Guys would work for hamburgers and
Wow.
soda. You get to the 90s, people got bills. You get to the 2000s, you got bills. I can't afford to go race with you as much as I want to because I got bills to pay. And the guys, and the other side of that is the guys I needed just they weren't available. There's not. I hired one guy. His name was Rick, and I couldn't stay busy enough for him, and he winds up leaving and going somewhere else, and I get it.
Yeah.
Kid had terrific hands. Do anything you want. I didn't make the commitment to race. I would have had to throw away the business and just commit to go racing. Without business, there is no racing because I don't have any money. It's not like there was a day job for me.
Right.
But I wasn't realized. If you look now, most of these teams, one guy drives the truck and trailer, one guy does the tuning, maybe two. One guy drives, one guy works on the engine, another guy works on the clutch or the converters these days, another guy works on the 4-link and the shocks. It's just you gotta have a minimum of 3 or 4 guys to do it right.
So you got to have all the specialties covered.
And you got to pay all these guys.
Yeah.
Okay? So you look at the street outlaw guys. The guys that aren't doing well are the guys that don't have the crew and the people. The guys that are doing the well, they have the crew and the people, and they're doing well. It's something I learned many years ago. And again, it was me being short-sighted. Back in the 60s, I watched guys. They never tell you what they did. They never gave you any information. They always kept it close to the vest. It's not the way it was years later.
And isn't it in a lot of cases you need to have the people to stay consistent? You need to have, because otherwise, if you can't get everything dialed in and keep things dialed in, you're just inconsistent with the car.
I'm going to tell you something I firmly believe. There is a window, a tuning window on a car. Once you get in that window, you could do almost anything and have it be wrong. Okay? You could do almost anything and not do any wrong, rather. I'm sorry. If you're not in that window, if you're above it, below it, left of it, right of it, anything you do is wrong, and you just can't figure it out. It's all about combinations.
Right.
The best story I can give you that is Mike Ashley again. Again, terrific guy, good driver. He buys a car from Scott. He buys a car from Jerry, buys an engine from Scott, goes to the first USSC race with the car down in Budds Creek. He can't hit his ass with both hands. I mean, terrible. They load it up. Now, I know Mike. He's not a real patient guy, okay? He comes back on Sunday to Englishtown. I don't know what they did. I don't know what they found. Maybe it was just luck. He unloads the car that he couldn't get down the track at Budds Creek, and he goes, now this is unheard of at time, 686, 211, I think it was. I mean, everybody's just shocked.
What was the difference? Was it different?
I don't know. They got in the window. That's why I'm a firm believer that whatever they touched, they got in that window. And when they found that tuning window, you couldn't do no wrong.
Was the track prep better at that track? Or?
No, because Budds Creek is terrific track. Okay. Englishtown, I liked Englishtown better. That's just me.
Right.
But both terrific tracks. There wasn't a national event there. It's not like they got oversprayed. No, you're showing up at a good track with good conditions, and nothing is overpaid. Just something happened. Same engine, same transmission. Maybe they changed the clutch. I never talked to him about it, but he went from being terrible and a nobody on Saturday to being the fastest guy in the country on Sunday. And not only did he go 686, he went 686, 687, 688, 680. Like every run was 211, 680. And all the other guys were like going 690s and struggling.
So he had everything dialed in. It was just
whatever happened, it got him in the window.
Yep.
It got him in the window. Hell, we had the 57. We bought that 57 from Rick Jones. Terrific car, extremely well built. It was exactly what I wanted, and I couldn't figure it out. Something was changing as it would leave the starting line, and it was shutting nitrous on and off, doing all sorts of weird shit, tear all the wiring out and change it. Okay? This is something I learned from another guy by accident. Okay, and we'll touch him in a second.
Mm-hmm.
Rewire it. And change the batteries while there just to be safe. Still got it. Change all the switches, change all the ignition, change it all. Change it all. Still there. You know what? Something's wrong. Change it all again. Finally hit it. Finally started going some speed with the car. Finally got it worked out. Well, by the time I got it worked out, Mike and I were on the same page, but in different places, okay? You would not be competitive with a nitrous car back when we separated and he wanted to do a supercharged car. I was going that direction. I had a guy in mind. I didn't know enough about it. He found a guy that did, and off they went.
Nice.
No,
I mean,
it
good
was
for
it was
him. I mean,
no, it was
yeah,
the right it
yeah.
was the right thing to do. Okay. Years later, that 57 went through a couple of hands. I think it's up in Virginia now. That thing's badass now. They kept working on it, throwing more, and the more power you threw at that car, the better it got. We had 706s. They started adding, big 7, 800-inch engines. That car got better and better and better with more power. I did a couple of things on that car that nobody did at that point because it ate up horsepower. In particular, I put a live axle in it because I was afraid that at some point you could break the studs, break an axle, and you could go through wheel bearings real fast with tire shakes. So I put a live axle in it. It had hubs. It was super safe. That's all the stuff they have to do now. We did that back in 2000. I just didn't have enough power to make it work. Okay? What I probably should have done is put another nitrous system on it, but I didn't know any better at that point. I didn't understand why that car just didn't absolutely haul ass, because it needed more power. It needed a bigger engine. It needed more nitrous. It needed more something. That car would have made an outstanding supercharged car because it had all the stuff in it. It was, the best way I can word it is, the stuff Rick did for us, it was overbuilt at the time, and it was a terrific car. I just did not realize what I had. So to go back to your point, you got to get in that tuning window. Once you're in that window, as long as you don't fall out of the window, shit's going to be fast. And that's why you see guys that are fast, and then they change something, and they fall out the window, and they get lost. And all of a sudden, like, how could the guy be that lost? Because you changed something. Either you went from an iron block to an aluminum block. I remember talking to Hoover, Ed Hoover. Super nice guy. Didn't know me. Could have told me to go whistle. We talked, and I said, man, this thing's badass. He's like, not really. He says, I'm struggling right now. And I go, what are you struggling about? He said, well, we changed the old car to carbon fiber to lighten it up, and I'm a little lost. It's not reacting like the other car did. Yep.
Wow.
So he had to go back and find it. Lighten the car up 100, whatever the difference, 150 pounds, because the car, carbon fiber tubs, carbon fiber floors. Back then you had a magnesium firewall. It's like I lost it. And I remember him working on it, and he finally found it because Ed was a terrific racer. But it took him, I think, 3 or 4 months to find it, and he was badass again. And you go, how could 150 pounds affect it that bad? You know what? You could make the simplest change, okay, and all of a sudden you're lost. You see these guys, they move the rear around, they put rear steer in the car, they do this, they do that, they try to make it more aggressive, they try to make it less aggressive, and they get out of that window, and now they're lost. And they don't know how to get back sometimes, okay? Naturally, they're bright guys. They wrote everything down they did. They know where they were. They went back to where they were, but something else has changed that made that happen. And you have to figure it out. Go back to the other guy. I remember being at track on a Wednesday night at Englishtown. 68 Camaro. Scott Schaffroth owned it. It was Blue Boy. He was there with him and Kaufman, and I was just a dummy in the back seat that would carry everything, okay? Fine, I'll be the dummy. At that point, I'm 17, 18 years old. I thought, was that 78? I was probably just 19 years old. They got this Camaro. It's got I think it had a 496 in it. 496 with nitrous. Terrific car. Or not a terrific car, terrific engine, terrific power. He goes out the first run, it won't go down the track. Falls on its face about 500 feet out. He comes back, and this is a very important lesson I learned from him. Change the ignition system. Well, nope. Change it all. Change the battery, change the starter, change the ignition box, change the coil, change the wires, change it all. Goes out and does the same thing. Change the carburetor, change the fuel pump, change the fuel lines, change it all.
It's doing one system at a time.
Okay? And I didn't understand the it all part, but I'll get back to that. Same thing.
Okay.
Goes back again. You know what? I think it's fuel. Change carburetor, change the regulator because they had parts. Change all that shit again. Go back out. This is a hunk of junk, okay, as a car. It's a bracket car with ladder bars, okay?
Okay.
He goes out and goes, I don't remember the speed. I just remember everybody, like a collective gasp went off, and it was just so impressive. Well, like an 868 or an 870, something like, which is unheard of. The pro stock cars at that time were just cracking into the eights. They were like 880s, 890s. You know, most of the guys were in the 90 range. He's out there with this hunk of junk ladder bar car going, and it must have been 165 miles an hour. I mean, I'm guessing. I really don't remember, other than it was like an 860 something. And they come back, and you're looking at the car, and he goes, all right, no problem. We're all figured out. No, and I don't know whether it's him or Paul. They go, oof, look, we left the air pan off. Should pick up a little more now. They put the air pan on, car drops dead. Scoop was too small. They were sucking all the air out of the scoop, and the engine was dropping dead. Take the air pan back off, right back out. I think it went 870 or something. Very impressive. Very impressive. The lesson I learned right there, you got to get in the window. Second lesson I learned, it's too expensive to make runs on a car and try to save money. Change it all. You want to change the fuel system? Change it all. Don't guess at what it is. Don't be a mechanic at the racetrack. You're right. That's the prudent thing to do. But you know what? You don't have enough time to go make one change at a time to find out it's none of those things. Okay? Change it all, and you'll figure out the parts later on. Change everything in the fuel system. Change everything in ignition. Long story short, that car was incredibly fast. It just super impressive, and I learned so many lessons from that. So many lessons. Don't save. You're not saving it, but change it all. Shit's too expensive. We're at the track. It's right now. Don't save no money. Change it. Change it, and we'll figure it out after that. You know, it's that simple. It's that simple. So you learn your lessons as you go along. It's like, you know, Scott was a bright guy. He knew what it took. And Paul had terrific hands. I think Paul had worked for Bob Glidden before that.
Okay.
It's been a long time. I think he worked for Glidden for a while. Then I think he went to, after Scott, I think he went to work for Moroso. Bright guy. Terrific. I mean, I watched him work. Terrific hands. Back to that Camaro, I learned a lot of lessons from him at the track. I learned from some very smart people. I was very lucky enough to know. It's one of the other lessons I learned from Scott. Scott was a terrific businessman, good driver. He was not the best mechanic in the world that I could see, but he knew how to find the best help. He had some of the best help I've ever seen. One guy was terrific with electronics, Tommy Karuba. I mean, I learned more electric stuff from him just in casual conversations than most people knew that I would sit down and talk to. Bright guy. But again, you have so many years in the business, you figure out who knows something and who don't.
Right. Very true. Very true. Well, that sounds like one heck of a career racing.
Oh gosh, we haven't even barely scratched the surface of that. Going to Rockingham. I was lucky enough to go around the country. The only place I really never went was the Northwest for lots of different reasons. And then at some point in the late 80s, it really turned out to be more. My business is growing, and I don't have the time to travel. You just don't.
Yeah.
You just don't. Sitting in airports waiting for planes, leaving the track, and trying to get to the airport on time. So and I was lucky. This was back in the day where you could be at the airport 10 minutes before a flight.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that no more. So it's even a bigger problem now. But you know, I was lucky. I got to see a lot of things. I got to meet a lot of people. I got to talk to a lot of people. I got the chance to see a lot of things happen that people don't realize can happen. Hell, I learned to do fiberglass because I'm at the track. And my friend Frank had his car there. And it blew the nose off the car. I remember standing on the starting line. He had just got it back from the chassis shop, and they updated it, and they put new stuff in it, and Frank goes down a track, and I see, whoop, you see something take off. Now, first thing you think is it lost the door. The nose blew off it. With that, over walks Jerry Haas, the super nice guy, and his main shop guy at the time, Todd Bevis, I think it was. He looks at it, no problem. Todd, come on. And before I know it, they're cutting fiberglass up, they're fiberglass and everything, and I realized you can do anything if you know what you're doing. Especially if you, or the location is the location is less important than the talent, than the talent. If you have the talent, you could do it anywhere. Okay,
Right.
It's that simple. And I watch guys do stuff at the track that just, okay, it's all doable. Here we are right now. Don't waste time. Don't complain about it. Let's do it. And off we went. Fixed the refiberglassed the whole nose, put it back on, remounted everything, and out he went again. Out he went again. Yeah, no, just I can tell you story after story after story like that. That was the first time I'd ever seen it. That was back in '84, '5, '6. Yeah, it's been a long time, so my memory is not as sharp on that stuff as it could be.
It's better than mine.
Hell, all I can tell you is the nose blew off it. Frank drove it like it was no big deal. If I was driving that car, I probably would have crashed it when the nose blew off. It would have startled the shit out of me. And I would have been steering like crazy, and Frank just, nope, shit happens, and off he went, and back they came, and they picked up all the pieces and turned nothing into something. Again, the problem is you're in Gainesville, you're in Florida, you live 20 hours away, you got to make it happen. And that's what they do. You make it happen.
Yep.
Make it happen.
Makes sense.
That's one of the things I learned.
Awesome. Matt,
Thank you.
once again, absolute pleasure.
No, pleasure's mine. We'll continue these conversations.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
The only thing I could say, let me add this, if somebody's listening to these and they want me to talk about something mechanical on an engine that I know, I'll be happy. Just ask. Leave a message in the comments, and I'll make a video with Mike on that stuff. We talked about rods, we talked about pistons, we talked about buttons. If you're a little lost on something, I'll try to help you. The biggest thing I could tell you is just ask. Ask. Most guys will help you. I'll be happy to help you. So, once again, thank you, Mike.
Awesome. Thank you.